Today we have another young Indian with us in the Voice of the Young series. Hello everyone, good to be back with you once again. Today we have Rohan Atrawalkar with us. Let's listen to him. Over to you, Rohan.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. It's a pleasure to be here on this platform. And I think a couple of things that I want to highlight about my journey into research, into this profession of first being a development researcher, then being a researcher looking at the macro picture of innovation and R&D in India, and what are really like some of the things which drove my curiosity to explore economics within all of these different dimensions.
Okay.
So to take a step back, I would say that like when I started with my BCom honors, which I did at Symbiosis University, I always had this curiosity of, I was very curious by concepts in philosophy, existentialism, rationalism. And one problem that I would always have is to be able to like try and remember some of these concepts, even though at the time when I would read it, I would find it quite interesting. But there was a lot of issues that I would have in remembering and actually conceptualizing it internally. And from that, I think there was this point that I sort of, I had made to myself this sort of commitment that whatever I'm reading, I want to be able to internalize it better. And I think that that's where the sort of germ of wanting to be a researcher actually started from, where I, in the search of like trying to think of new concepts, trying to think of new frameworks of thought, I started digging further and further into the areas that I was studying at the time. So I did multiple courses in philosophy, liberal arts,
Wow.
and
And
I
by
was
the way,
also very.
the philosophers were from which countries?
Yeah, so I mean, because most of my professors were like, they had a strong influence of like Karl Marx and Lenin, etc. So, I mean, there was this whole Hegelian thought which was there, and most of the philosophers were European
Okay.
that they would talk about. And I think, but I had a few professors who would also make it a point to draw comparisons from Indian mythology, and that was always a very interesting way of sort of remembering the concepts in a way. And I think that, as I went along in my BCom, I started to develop a deeper interest in trying to understand, how does society function in a way that we have the level of inequality that we have today in society, and what are some of the machine that drives capitalism. And there's just a lot of buzz around that time. I think it was the time when there was the US elections which were also going on, and I became very interested in trying to understand all of these concepts of the left versus the right, capitalism versus socialism. And I think that sort of nudged me further to think of real life examples of what is actually happening within economics and society.
Okay.
So from that point, I basically I went into doing a master's
Okay,
in
but before
development
we go,
economics.
let me ask, did you by any chance hear of John Rawls, RAWLS, a professor
And
at Harvard?
yes, I did like a course where his concepts were taught, but
Okay.
that would be in my master's. Yeah.
Okay, fine. But
Um,
okay, all right. That's, and did
yeah.
you ever hear of Piketty, an economist?
Yes, I mean his work on inequality is of
Okay,
course like
fine. All right.
quite.
I'm just asking what they teach, not what you know. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
curious also to see what they teach. All right, good. Let's continue.
Yeah. So, I the decision to sort of go into development studies was, I was at this point, in my career where I just finished my bachelor's, and I had done like a short internship for about 7 to 8 months. I was working on a farm, and in that place, it was also about sort of trying to explain to people what ecology and sustainability really is
Mm-hmm.
through a live experiment in a way. So there would be multiple workshops where people would be conducting these awareness building workshops and talking about, what is food waste, what is the impact of our consumer choices, and those kind of things. So there was that, and there was also this element of the lived experience of being at the farm and actually seeing biodiversity grow and things made out of sustainable materials and
So it's a
all of
private
those things.
farm, or what sort of a farm was it?
So it was a private farm, and I'm still connected with the person who runs it. And it is a wonderful place. I mean, when I went there as an impressionable 19-year-old, 18-year-old, I was like quite blown away by the kind of impact that it was having on people around me. That people were actually volunteering and like working on farms, on the farming, and they were doing things by hand, and they actually put a lot of premium on that. So that was sort of like a that sort of gave me a push to understand several different dimensions of the ecology and also aspects of development, where I wanted to understand that, okay, if we are actually talking about saving the climate, we're talking about saving environment, then where does capitalism come into the picture?
Mm-hmm.
And there I started actually researching a bit. I looked at some articles and some works by Vandana Shiva,
Mm-hmm.
who has written extensively on the growth of GMOs and how capitalism has driven and profits have driven the growth of GMOs, and taken over the organic agriculture and the traditional agricultural methods.
Mm-hmm.
So it was at that point that it sort of solidified my decision to try and understand development in a sense.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that so that led me to pursue a master's in development studies at Tata
Okay.
Institute of Social Sciences,
Okay.
where I was exposed to a large, like very interdisciplinary perspectives of sociology, economics, philosophy, law, and all the different perspectives of
Okay.
thinking about society.
It's the
So
real
it was,
world. It's the real
yeah,
world.
absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
and there was like a lot of like fieldwork components, etc. to it.
Yeah.
Like almost every other course meant that I had to go and do a primary survey, or like I was also using a lot of statistical tools like Stata and R to uh, like basic descriptive analysis. And then it was only in my second year where I mean, did some regression analysis and those
Yes.
kind of things.
Yeah.
So the whole perspectives that I mean, the different lenses that I was exposed to when I was at TIS was extremely helpful in sort of giving me perspective of thinking about
Yeah.
society
Yeah.
and capitalism. So I think it was at that point that I realized that, I mean, we have so many different, within economics, we have, we have different theories of growth. And that was pretty much the first starting point of my development studies course. Like, how do you look at growth? What is the
Mm.
role of technology? What
Yeah.
is the role of, development and those kind of things? So it was at that point that I started. I sort of went back to my initial motivation of wanting to, build a framework for myself and sort of put these concepts into sort of like a tree where
Yeah.
I can think of them. I can personalize my own examples, and that will
Yeah.
help me remember better.
Okay.
So I've sort of went back to that initial principle that I had sort of committed myself to. And throughout my 2 years, I tried my best to sort of build my own framework, build
Okay.
my own examples, and
Okay.
that really helped to actually be able to remember a lot of these concepts. And and sort of another major theme of that I picked up on, and that gave me a lot of thought, was while I was at TIS, is the interventions. What is the level of at which an intervention is useful or not useful, at the level at which it works?
Yeah.
Because we had multiple courses on public policy,
Yeah.
on the one hand, and we also had courses on actually like change that is being enacted on the ground level, and all of these different ways in which interventions can be seen.
Okay.
So that was a very interesting way of sort of, trying to build my own perspective on what
Hmm.
works and what doesn't work. But of course, at that point, it was all theoretical, and I
Yeah.
didn't really have a frame of reference for that. So after I graduated from this, I started working at an NGO which is called Protector Ecological Foundation.
Yeah.
Uh, Sorry, my bad. It's called. So I was working at Protectora, which was actually the farm organization, and I started working at their foundation, which is essentially looking at the role of colleges and universities as a network to cut down on emissions.
Hmm.
So they were trying to enact change through university campuses and college campuses, and saying that let's install smart meters to monitor our electricity consumption, water consumption,
Hmm.
and cut down on emissions and
Hmm.
sort of track our usage in a way.
Yeah.
So that was my first sort of exposure to, where I was working full time and trying to do something that was related to social impact in a way. There, I was also introduced to an interesting concept that is now, which has now become sort of a staple, which is
Yeah.
the SDGs framework.
Yes.
Uh, so today, it's like pretty much everyone is trying to integrate the SDGs framework to talk about whatever work they're doing.
Hmm.
Uh, and there, it was the project that I was working on. It was called Smart Campus Cloud Network.
Hmm.
So it was essentially this network of universities which were trying to work on the SDGs, but
Yeah.
particularly the SDGs on related to climate change, life
Okay.
on land, life on water.
Yeah.
So life in water. So it was, whenever I would write proposals, or I would, reach out to people that, hey, this is something that we are doing, and if your college would be a part of it, it would be a great initiative. And, so it was the framing, like how I was able to frame it, and the different ways, the different options I had really determined, how what the outcome was going to be in a way.
Right.
If I took the approach of saying that, if I was talking to a vice chancellor or a director of some department, then I would be like, okay, if you join the smart campus, you will be able to contribute to SDGs.
Yeah.
So that would be one way of approaching it.
Yeah.
And the other way of approaching it would be to say that, hey, if you actually install smart meters, if you use solar panels and other clean tech related solutions, then you will be able to cut down on your costs.
Right.
You'll have energy savings and you'll have
Yeah.
offsets, those
Yes.
kind of things. So it was really, the messaging aspect of it, and we used to do a lot of advocacy related things. So I think it was at that stage where I realized, that within the larger structure of the SDGs, that sort of provides a very useful framework to conceptualize
Yeah.
all the efforts that people are doing.
Yeah.
But there is also potential for it to be overused in a sense.
Yeah.
So it's about how you put the message across,
Yeah.
contextualize it. And I think that the SDGs, within the SDG frameworks, they're also doing a lot of effort in trying to localize the SDGs
Yeah.
and talking about it in within a local context.
Right.
So essentially, like when I was working within the development sector, that was my exposure to working in education and climate tech. Exposed me to understand the SDGs framework quite well, and understand aspects of environment, etc. After that, I had a brief stint in development consulting,
Yeah.
where I worked with Satwa, which is a consulting firm
Yeah.
in India. And I got a chance to work on a water and sanitation project where we were evaluating how a program, it was an endline evaluation of how a program had been properly implemented, whether it was implemented or not properly.
Yeah.
There were certain benchmarks, etc.
Yeah.
So what I found is that consultants always sort of have a bad rep and I had read about it previously, like, what do consulting firms do, and I came across some articles where they say that consultants don't have any skin in the game. They don't have anything to
Yeah.
lose, in a sense. So when I started working and generating those insights, crunching the data that we got from our field coordinators and field managers,
Yeah.
I realized that there's a lot of data, and the kind of story that we're portraying has to be accurate to the data,
Right.
and it has to be accurate to what is objectively the reality, and not just what the NGO that for whom we were doing this evaluation study, what they would like to hear.
Right.
It shouldn't just be about that.
No.
So that was something that was always important. I think that was encouraged within the organization also, that we should try to think of these objectively. And at the same time, there were also some very interesting frameworks, some very well developed frameworks within the consulting field. I've realized that
Yeah.
where it's trying to understand the social, economic, cultural aspects of whatever you are evaluating. So in the study that I was doing, it was essentially an evaluation of wash related infrastructure, water and sanitation
Yeah.
related infrastructure.
Yeah.
And what we found is that there was about 50% to 60% usage of the toilets and the other sanitation facilities. So there we actually looked at whether they were working or not, and we found that almost 80% of them were working,
Were
but it was
working.
were actually working,
Yeah.
but some were not used. And there are then we looked at the cultural factors and social factors, that you have this problem of open defecation, and
Yeah.
a lot of these cultural practices which sort of come into play in defining who gets to use a toilet, and things like caste and class and those kind of aspects.
Yeah.
So while I was in development consulting, and the brief stint that I had, I realized that the importance of frameworks was very
Yeah.
important to and some of these are very well defined, and once you start working, you realize that you have room to sort of elaborate on certain areas more within the defined, and these are like purposely kind of kept broad in a sense, so that you can sort of put your findings in through different, like cross you can cross link findings across different themes. After I worked in development consulting for a while, I got an opportunity to work where in a place where I'm currently working. It's called Center for Technology Innovation and Economic Research. So it is essentially a think tank which is trying to understand the importance of R&D and innovation within India.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to study is basically, it is a combination of public economics and the role of understanding the role of institutions.
Yeah.
So we have a very clear problem statement in a way, which is that today, the way that research is happening in India, most of the public funded research is happening within government funded autonomous labs.
Yeah.
So the government is funding the research, the government is itself performing the research, and this is happening across the board across different ministries, into like the strategic earth sciences,
Mm-hmm.
and we have Department of Science and Technology, Department of Biotechnology, and most of the funding from these ministries goes to their own labs.
Okay.
So the idea is that in most of the other models that we have from other countries, what we have is that it is the government which actually funds the research, but it is actually performed within higher education institutions and industry. So that is, we're trying to understand that what are some of the models that we can study, and what are some of the models that we can look at, and how do they relate to India within that,
Yeah.
within the Indian context. Because currently our scientific output from these laboratories is not very great, and we're trying. I mean, it is also a question of how we try to understand, scientific output and socioeconomic output, because the mandate of most of these labs is towards public welfare. So they do extensive work in actually trying to disseminate their research at the grassroots level. There are, I mean, we have done a study on the evaluation of public funded labs. So we
Yeah,
evaluated 193 laboratories
yeah,
uh, in India,
yeah.
and we found that there's a lot of work happening in outreach. They're trying to, spread the technologies that they're developing. So basically, we're trying to understand how can higher education, how
Well,
can industry
just 1 minute
come.
before you go.
Yeah,
So, what I seem to hear is that they are actually doing things which they can explain to the common people, right? There's some
yeah,
outfit. That means they are not doing high tech, innovative, cutting edge research. Rather, they are producing what you might call as applied R&D. They are producing products that can be directly used by people or services. Just explain to
Hmm.
me this,
Right.
this difference. How do you see it?
Sure. So, what we find is that most of the research which is happening within the space of like looking at emerging technologies, right? If you look at AI and deep tech related sectors, I think that there is a lot of work happening within these labs. But what we find is that a majority of them are sort of working on tech, which is trying to, we're looking at technologies which exist outside India, and they're trying to, sort of develop an indigenized version of that, because
Okay.
our import dependency on majority of the high tech sectors
Yeah.
is very high.
Yeah.
So a lot of the effort of these public R&D labs is actually to try and develop those indigenously.
Yeah. I
And
understand.
there are obviously some very successful examples, such as the ICMR case, where, in the development of vaccines and all of that.
Okay.
But I think so. So in a way, it is something which can be, like you said, it is working on tech, which can be given, this perspective of, okay, it is, something for the common man, and it is about indigenizing the technologies.
Yeah.
So it is, in a way, it is trying to say that, okay, and today, in today's geopolitical climate, it is actually important to have technologies which are homegrown, right? So it's there's a very vital role that these public labs are playing. But now it is at this point that they're realizing that today there is a lot of expertise which exists outside the labs,
Yeah.
because the incentive structures
Yeah.
outside the government are very different.
Yeah.
So why an industry would perform R&D, or and how basic research is happening within higher education. So they've realized that the incentive structures are very different. And what we find is that there are a lot of collaborative models which are engaging, where, they, especially in the emerging technologies, so they're trying to engage, industry and higher education to sort of perform a lot more of the R&D,
Okay.
particularly say within AI and within quantum tech. And there are a lot of examples which are coming up now. And DRDO also, for example, DRDO has set up a lot of centers of excellence across, I think, some 15, 10 to 15 higher education institutions.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that this is a model which a lot of ministries are following. So essentially, our role at, I mean, a lot of our study at research at Steer is sort of to identify what is the role that industry can play, what is the role that higher education can play within India.
Okay. Good.
So
This
yeah,
is about your findings, and I want to shift back to you.
yes,
How do
right.
you
So
see? How do you see yourself in the future? Is this because you've shifted? I mean, it's just so many shifts. You did
Yeah.
BCom. BCom people don't do such things, right? They become chartered accountants. That's what the job is. Then you shifted from there to there, went to a farm, you did this, you did that. Now you are studying technologies and so on. So, how do you see yourself as a modern young Indian who's flexible and adaptive, or somebody who hasn't made up his mind? How do you see yourself? I'm just asking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that at this point, like I'm kind of like most of my efforts, and I try to, sort of write some articles, policy briefs every now and then. And most of the curiosity that drives it is to, try to understand all these different, from all these different perspectives, what is actually happening in India and how can that sort of transform.
Yeah,
So for me, I think sort of developing this curiosity and keeping it constant is always a priority, because throughout my work at Steer, I'm doing multiple things. There are conferences to be organized and a bunch of other, like couple of things, other things that I'm doing. So
yeah,
it's sort of like it's really important to have these discussions with peers. And I think today, I mean what I would really like to do, and hopefully something that I will be able to mobilize soon, is sort of develop sort of like a community of people who are talking about emerging tech, in your local cafes, in your local, what we find, the models that we have today on LinkedIn, and that we see on LinkedIn at least, is that there's people who have organized public policy meetups, and they're meeting enthusiastic people in these coffee shops, etc. And this is something that happens once in 3 months or something like that.
yeah,
But what I would like to do is that, just have like a small WhatsApp group, and that can obviously be expanding.
yeah.
But something like just meeting up on Fridays for a chat, talking about a certain topic and
Okay.
related to technology.
Yeah.
Currently, I am doing this, but not related to technology and economics.
Hmm.
So I'm a part of a community which is called the Kindness Club.
Yeah.
So we get together on Fridays and we talk about different ideas related to pretty much like everything under the sun, ecology.
Yeah.
We also talk about like some aspects of philosophy, religion, and
Hmm.
modern day trends within like
Hmm.
uh, what's happening with marriages in India, and the cultural aspects of all these dimensions also.
Could you
So I want
share?
to do something
Could
which is
you share?
specific
Could you
to.
share some of those things? Let's see what you people talk about. I'm keen to hear
Sure.
what you people
Yeah,
talk about, what you conclude, because I'm too old. I have no clue. So honestly,
absolutely.
it's not a
So
critical question. It's an information question. What is it that fascinates you? Some recent topic. What were the views? Let's hear it.
sure. So you mean like something that was discussed at the club that I'm talking about, or
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it
So
that?
okay. So I mean, very interesting. Like
Yeah.
yesterday, we had a session yesterday, and the topic was imposter syndrome.
Okay.
So imposter syndrome is a very interesting concept. I think everyone has it. It is this idea that you have been doing well in a job, at life generally, and you sort of believe that it is a facade,
Yeah.
and you're just sort of keeping it up because nobody is seeing you,
Yeah.
for what you really are, and it's just
Yeah.
circumstances uh, which have sort of helped for
Yeah.
things to work out in your life.
Yeah.
So we had a we were discussing about this topic, and then we
Yeah.
discussed, okay, like in certain fields it's likely that you feel the imposter syndrome a lot more than other fields. So for instance, within the arts, so within the community that I'm talking about here, there are artists and other people from all walks of life. So there's some people, very interesting perspectives where people are saying that in fields where the final output is sort of based on subjective judgment, it is like, okay, how, if you're a writer, you're a dancer, you're a singer, how do I know that what I'm creating is good or not, you
Yeah.
know so it's this idea that I think everyone has, but it's sort of related to sort of, and also another interesting thing which we discussed is that today we have a lot of different reference models and people that we look up to, and different cultural stereotypes in a way that we sort of refer to when we think of our lives.
Yeah,
That I am 26 and I should be doing XYZ things by
yeah,
now.
yeah,
So today I think we have a lot more of those sort of stereotypes and cultural sort of objects to sort of compare ourselves to.
right.
So it's a lot more, I think, today that we feel this imposter syndrome. And I think particularly within particularly like new fields like public policy in India, or
Yeah,
what we are doing,
yeah,
studying innovation and economics. I think it's something that is so new in India that it's very sometimes very hard to sort of find a benchmark for what you're saying.
yeah,
So you kind of feel like, okay, we are saying all of these things, but we have to make sure that the data is all right.
yeah,
We have to try extra hard.
yeah,
So this like danger of feeling like you're an imposter is quite high. So
yeah.
it's kind of like a driving factor to do
Okay.
better.
All right. I get it.
So
And,
yeah, so
yeah,
that's
I get
that's
it. Okay. Yeah. Good. That's a very nice discussion topic.
yeah.
Anything else you would like to add at this point?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing that I think I've learned a lot, which is sort of thinking about first principles, right?
Okay.
And I'm very curious about the idea of first principles. And so I had this professor. His name is Ashish Kulkarni.
Yeah.
He taught me economics when I was in bachelor's. So he has this wonderful blog called Econ for Everybody,
Yeah.
and in that he talks about how, like, pretty much everything, any situation that you're trying to assess or understand, there are incentives, there are opportunity costs, there are externalities, there are prices. And it's a question of, if you're saying that something is bad, like the food situation in India, the the wastage of food grains in India is bad, it can be avoided. So it's about, like, okay, in reference to what,
Yeah.
it's always like trying to think about things in reference to something else.
Right.
So it's some of these first principles, I think, that I think everyone in this field who's trying to be a researcher should try to have some very strong first principles, and thinking about incentives, thinking about opportunity costs. It
Yeah.
really helps to
Yeah.
have your own lens and
Yeah.
sort
Okay.
of build it up. So I would actually love to hear your first principles and how you have like sort of grown your own lens of looking at the world, uh,
Well, yeah.
particularly with economics.
Okay. Let me answer it as honestly as I can. I agree with the idea fully. Okay. And partly because of that, I have tried to change the nature of my work every few years so that I don't get stuck in it's not challenging and you get stuck in a stereotype and you don't do things from the first principles. And it has worked for me, though it is very risky to be doing it. So, for example, in the mid 1990s, for whatever, I stopped having a job in 1988. I couldn't handle having a job because they said, well, if you become a professor here, you will teach this course for 30 years. I said, out. I'm out. I
Hmm.
can't do it. Okay. I need to do something. And so you have to always look at it from first principles.
Yes.
So at one point, the U.S. Postal Service hired me as a consultant. Okay, I know nothing about the U.S. Postal Service, and I don't know anything about the specific issue that they had. But then they explained to me that this is the problem. They are regulated. This is the problem we are having in regulation, and we think that we are right and our regulator is wrong. Can
Hmm.
you please tell us why the regulator is wrong? And you have to look at it from first principles. You can't
Hmm.
look at it from the case because
Right.
people have looked at it from the case and they can't figure it out. Okay,
Hmm.
so you have to look at it from the first principles. Okay,
Right.
so even at that time, the World Bank hired me to design a renewable energy solar program in rural Indonesia. Okay,
Hmm.
same time. I'm working for the US force. So I had no clue as to what is solar. I'd never been to rural Indonesia. I've been to Indonesia once on some work,
Hmm.
but that was about natural gas, not about solar, nothing. And I said, look, what do I know? They say, yeah, we know you know nothing. Okay. That's all right, because you will look at it from first principles. Okay.
Hmm.
And
Right.
then I proposed a subsidy scheme because subsidy is needed. And
Hmm.
that subsidy scheme, I had to convince my team for it first. And then they said, listen, you convinced us, but the minister is saying this is crazy.
Hmm.
Okay. You go and tell the minister. My boss said, I'm not going. You go and tell the minister why it's not crazy. Okay. Now I had to explain to him from the first principles. Now you're going to talk to a minister. You get 2 minutes. Okay. You don't, no minister listens more than 2 minutes. So I said to him, sir, you are Asian. I'm Asian. Can we talk as Asians? He said, yes. Okay. I said, look, if you want to help your nephew buy a house, right?
Hmm.
And you're going to give him a subsidy. Will you give the subsidy him, or will you deposit the money in the bank? And when the bank gives your nephew the rest of
Hmm.
the money as a loan, then they also release the subsidy, right?
Hmm.
He said, yeah, I'll give the money to the bank. I won't,
Yeah.
otherwise my nephew, who knows what the nephew will do. I said, sir, that is my
Right.
subsidy scheme, right?
Hmm.
I have taken the same idea and I formalized it. And that was a very successful scheme. We didn't get much success in Indonesia because we had the East Asian crisis, but we are using that subsidy scheme in Bangladesh. There are 5 million rural homes with solar panels in Bangladesh on their roof, 5 to 6 million, thanks to the implementers
Right.
who are excellent. But the idea of the subsidy is from first principles.
Hmm.
Okay,
Right.
so I have always been involved in things from first principles. And honestly, I thought of this video segment from first principles because there's nothing like it.
Yeah.
So I thought, what is the
Absolutely.
situation today? What is the technology today? What are the young people doing? Let's, from scratch, you have to put it together.
Yeah.
So, but
Correct.
it's not easy for everybody to do it. So you have to,
Hmm.
and you have to also take account of, you can't have everything from first principles. It has to be also
Hmm.
grounded, right?
Correct.
In some reality, it has to be grounded. And then you can innovate to some extent from first principles.
Hmm.
Okay. So
Right.
if you go totally out of the box, then you may find that nobody will believe you. Okay. You are stuck. Okay.
Hmm.
If you go partly from first principles and partly you recognize the ground reality, right? Which you have to accept others' views of what it is.
Correct.
And then you
Yeah.
work with them and you convince them, then you can get your ideas through. That's what I have found, that you need to have. I mean, I give you another example. I had
Hmm.
gone to a very remote part of Uganda, and it's the border with Congo, and we had to basically bribe the army to protect us. Okay.
Hmm.
We just put it as petrol expenses.
Right.
Because in the report, what are you going to say? I bribed the army? No.
Absolutely.
It's a petrol expenses. They were willing to give a receipt, petrol expenses. Okay, fine. The very dangerous part. Now there are two districts there. They are
Hmm.
fight. We're going to put a small little dam. Small means very, very tiny, to
Right.
generate electricity, which would serve the two remote districts. There's no chance of getting the power from the main line because it's so far,
Hmm.
nobody's going to connect it. Okay, there's one river and they are fighting where the dam should be placed. And the
Right.
dam was, there's one district that is more prosperous and they said, put the dam here. We have more
Hmm.
demand. The other one is saying, no, but the technical people say our site is better suited, right?
Yeah.
So it's more better to put the dam here and send the electricity to those people. Okay, but
Hmm.
engineers say, yeah, that's right, because that's better. But the politicians
Hmm.
and the local people are fighting, and it's been years since the dispute has been going on. Actually, nobody can decide. So we were there, I was with technical people, And a very dangerous part of the world, difficult part. You can't just go there. But the team with me is very dedicated, hardworking
Right.
people. So I'm just the thinker. They know. Like
Yeah.
one guy is older than me. He said, "Look, I need to walk down to where the river is, where the dam will be located. I want to touch the water. Without it," I
Mm.
said, "You are so old. How will you go?" He says, "Listen, you want my approval? You let me go there.
Mm.
I have to know it." So then, when we are stuck, what are we going to do? And
Mm.
on the way back from that other less developed district to the more developed district, I asked my engineers that, listen, we can't just rely on a dam. You must have some backup power. I mean, this much I knew. They said, yes, we'll
Right.
have to have backup power. I said, what will be the backup power? They said, well, it will be some kind of a diesel run system so that it is independent of the weather.
Mm.
Okay. So then I said,
Yeah.
well, why don't we build that first? Because the dam will take
Mm.
4 years. But how long
Yeah.
will this diesel-based system take? They said, oh, that we can do in 6 months. So I said, why don't we build the bloody backup first and put that backup in the district that has more demand and tell the people in the other district that the dam is going to come there.
Mm.
Okay. They said, yeah, it's doable. So this is from first principles.
Absolutely.
So then when we went to this other district and they were waiting for us with daggers that now these guys will say the same thing, that that site is better and we can't have it. I said, no, I'm not saying that. I'll give you power in 6 months. If you put the dam, it'll take 4 years. I'll give you
Mm.
power in 6 months. They said, I said, I'll build your diesel backup first. And the
Right.
president of Uganda flew to inaugurate
Mm.
it. It was so important
Right.
that the president of Uganda flew out to inaugurate
Yeah.
that diesel run system. But that was from first principle. I said, I'm not an
Mm.
engineer, but I know that we need a backup. We can't just have one dam. I mean,
Correct.
that is well known in the power business. It's not innovative, it's something that's there. And so, Ananda, can you just log out? I'll be back to you in a minute, okay?
Sure, sure.
Okay. So I'm running into the next one. But anyway,
Sure.
so we did that. And so what I'm saying is that if you think from first principles,
Yeah.
you can get ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. I think this is the experience of like working and seeing different contexts for the same problem. You see multiple different contexts, and then you realize that okay, there's a common thread between all of them, and then that relates to like the first principle or the principles in a way. So
Okay. All right.
yeah,
He
it's
logged
been
in 10
wonderful.
minutes early, but we still have a few minutes. Okay. But I
Okay.
think
No
I
worries.
think we have talked enough. And I'm
Yeah,
really
it's been
happy to
wonderful.
hear what you are doing. It can, it's very good to know that people are searching for some kind of truth. And some things, the
Yeah,
truth is not abstract, it's actually what works,
correct.
how we can get ahead, how we can do things. And maybe I'll catch up with you in 1 year
Absolutely.
to
It was
see
great
what
talking to
truths you
you,
have
and
discovered in this 1 year. Okay.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's say bye to the viewers. I'll talk to you for a
All
few
right.
minutes after this. And let's say
Okay.
bye. And I'll come back to you. I'll send you the link soon, but let me come back to you in about 1 year. Just send me a note and we'll
Absolutely.
again. Okay, so let's say bye. Bye,
Bye.
everybody.